To start the panel off, I would like to introduce our panelists. First off, we have Ajantha Subramanian, who's a professor of anthropology and South Asian studies at Harvard University, USA. Her first book, Showlines, Space and Rights in South India, Stanford University Press 2009 and Yoda Press 2013, chronicles the struggles for resource rights by Catholic figures in India's southwestern coast. Immediately afterwards, we have Savi Sawarkar, and he has been an eminent artist and activist and has been at the receiving end of a number of different scholarships and awards. Then we have Professor Sukhadeo Thorat. Sukhadeo Thorat is an economist and was a former chairperson of the University Grants Commission of India. He's a professor emeritus at the Center for the Study of Regional Development, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And he has received several awards for public service for marginalized groups, minorities, and education. Next, we have Mr. T.M. Krishna. T.M. Krishna is a vocalist in the Carnatic tradition, uncommon in his rendition of music and original in his interpretation of it. He's at once strong and subtle, manifestly traditional and stunningly innovative. Krishna is also a prominent public intellectual, writing and speaking on the issues of structural inequality and culture. I would like to start off the session now with the first question that I have for all the panelists. And the first question that we'll be talking about today is that caste has a long and pernicious history in India, where it has shaped various practices and professions. How does it manifest in particular in the arts and on university campuses? I would request all the panelists to pitch in for this. Thank you so much.
Well, caste is based on an ideology which gives privileges to the high caste and deny the normal human rights to the lower caste, particularly to the scheduled caste. So it's based on those privileges, and therefore the high caste, in whatever expression they come, they would like to avoid projecting the problem of caste so as to maintain the privileges. Now, as far as the art is concerned, we find no expression of caste discrimination being painted by the high caste artists. The Dalit life is completely invisible. Whereas in education, you find educational institution, you find caste discrimination is experienced by the student. So you have this contrasting reality that in arts, song, music, cinema, literature, this has been not made visible. It is the Dalit who had to take initiative in music, song, cinema, and the literature to project the social life of theirs. But in education, it is like any other sphere. They face discrimination and exclusion and humiliation.
So yeah, just to pick up on what Professor Thorat said, caste has shaped university campuses and even the very structure of higher education in India. Right? So the history of caste in India has meant that the very act of creating an academic discipline, or even the act of creating a university as a sort of bounded space of knowledge, these are practices that rest on caste exclusion and distinction, right? So in my own work, I've looked at how this process has played out in the creation of engineering education in India. So let me just use this as an example of a kind of wider process, right? So engineering was formalized as a professional discipline in the 19th century, and this was done by very deliberately distinguishing it from artisanship and from the trades, right? So this distinction between the engineering profession on the one side and artisanship and trades on the other was actually a way of elevating engineering as a form of conceptual learning that was different from the manual skill of the artisan and of the trader, right? So it's this process of making engineering a professional discipline that can be learned in a university that made it attractive to upper caste and secured the social perception of engineering as a high status pursuit. So this process of making a discipline, right, of connecting it to a high status profession is also a process of marginalization, right? Because it's through this process that lower caste groups who actually had histories of technical skill and knowledge were marginalized, right, in favor of upper castes who had historically disdained these forms of kind of hands-on labor. So you see in that distinction, right, between professions and artisanship, one way that caste is perpetuated. But even if you look at, even within engineering, for instance, the more elite institutions like the IITs were themselves set apart from other engineering colleges as spaces of conceptual learning, where theory was more important than hands-on practice. So these continuing forms of distinction, right, between different forms of knowledge, between different institutions, these are all ways of perpetuating caste hierarchy, right? They allow for the privileging of certain forms of knowledge. And they kind of reinforce the idea that only upper castes have an innate capacity for conceptual knowledge and are best suited to inhabit institutions like the university, right? To inhabit professional life. And so in addition to this kind of way that knowledge becomes evaluated and disciplines are formed, we also see caste operating just in the collective inheritances of literacy, of schooling, of employment, right? That make it possible for upper caste groups to treat higher education as a natural entitlement, right? And for lower caste groups, by contrast, to see it as a near impossibility. So these collective inheritances give upper castes the upper hand in all sorts of ways, right? It gives them greater kind of facility with things like exams. It allows them to inhabit colleges and universities with a sense of ease and entitlement. It instills in them a sense of self-worth and self-confidence, right? It allows them to keep accumulating capital by leveraging their caste inheritances to get the best jobs. And I mean, this is in such contrast to the way sort of Dalit students in particular, right, who get into colleges and universities feel, right? They're constantly made to feel like they don't belong, that they don't deserve to be there, that they don't even have the right to the same aspirations as their upper caste peers, right? And this is especially the case in more prestigious institutions. So like Dalit and OBC students I've spoken to at the IITs, they talk about this kind of enduring sense of being imposters, right? Who've stolen seats that rightfully belong to other people, right? They're assumed to be less intelligent, less deserving, less capable because they've come in, say, through reservations, right? They also speak of this incredibly like deep-seated fear that comes from being outed as a reserved category student because of the stigma that attaches to this designation, and how even like the most casual conversations on campus, you know, about music or about food or about movies can be treacherous because they can become ways of revealing people's caste backgrounds, right? And despite the pervasiveness of casteism on these campuses, when these Dalit students or OBC students call attention to their own experiences of discrimination, they're either met with skepticism or they're accused of bringing caste onto the campus, right? They're accused of like bringing caste sentiment and tensions onto campuses that are supposedly free of caste. So I think in all of these ways, university campuses are rife with caste feeling, right? And caste prejudice.
Yes. Savi, would you like to go next regarding this?
Yes. Being an artist, as an Ambedkarite artist, when I look at to the Indian scenario of contemporary Indian artist and the old Indian artist, when I look into the art, there is a lot of the plethora of the content, because this issues is basically is a notion basis. Caste is a notion. Caste is the idea. It is not a natural phenomenon. It's a manifestation of the ill psyche, I can say like this. When we just my some of my personal experiences in the society, what I see, what I perceive, what my perception got developed through the direct perception. For example, when I went to the Sondati, I went to the Bombay Red Light area, I have seen what is the condition of the Devdas. That is my empirical ethnographical study. Then I came to know what is this kind of issues. This all mental blockades is the trap in the mental, that is everything in the notion. How that notion, how that art will be held to the cut to the notion through the notion. This is the battle again. When we enter in the school of art or the university campus, what is the condition of the Dalit student? In colleges, suppose one student comes and he wants to work on the subject of what he lives, what is his personal experience. He's not allowed. But that is not a part of partial of the curriculum, but that is a part and the partial of their own life. So how can we that he can touch the living subjects? So this is my personal experience when I pass out from the MSc Baroda during my Nagpur education. I studied that new Buddhist imagery, and that imagery is the manifestation of when Dr. Ambedkar embraced Buddhism in 1956. So that new images came. The image, that is the living art, I can say like this. And now there is a plethora of the image of Dr. Ambedkar's image, Buddha's image, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule's image, Savitribai Phule's image, and now Fatima Sheikh also is coming there. This is the politics of the image. That is need to know that this image itself has a lot of potential. Image itself is a living expression to express a ill mind, to express a casteist mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Savi. I just have a few announcements before I pass on this to Mr. Krishna. Could people in the participation kindly put forward any questions in the group chat or in the Q&A, preferably in the Q&A box that is there below. And yeah, thank you. Mr. Krishna, I'll leave it on to you to answer the question.
Thank you. I mean, I think fundamentally, we have to understand that Indian culture is casteist, or cultures is casteist. That the whole framework of cultures that have been created in this country is a casteist framework. Now, does that mean beauty does not happen? Does that mean art is not pleasurable? No, that does not mean that. But it means that the very framework of very structural basis for which we have identified ourselves, we have divided ourselves, is based on caste and patriarchy at the foundation of everything. A complete acknowledgement of this ugliness is essential in the art world. Now, what makes this even more complicated in the art world is because a lot of discrimination is passed on as preference, you know, and there is no tactile way of me to hold somebody and say the whole notion of judgment and preference and taste is itself built on caste, is built on the homogeneous nature of your living. The fact that you live in a certain neighborhood, you see the same kind of people, you speak the same language, you go to a school where similar people are studying. So your whole notion of beauty, which is considered so abstract, what is beautiful, what color is beautiful, what is melodious, what is rhythmical, this entire framework is not something that is floating above the realities of the politics and social discriminative nature of humanity, and in this case, us Indians. So we have to somehow, a realization of this is very important, because, like, for example, I think what we are building today is upper caste Fab India colors. That's what we call India today. Every home looks the same. It has to have earthy colors. If I see somebody having a fluorescent pink, I think it's ugly. Actually, it's casteist and it's actually discriminative because it comes from these notions we have built. So we are also built an aesthetic aspiration in caste, something we never recognize, that aesthetics is actually one of the mechanics of discrimination. And you create an aesthetic aspiration. So everybody wants to look a certain way, wants to speak a certain language. So this entire thing is built in the way we study, the way we look. So the art world, I want to take off from what Ajantha said, because I have a similar parallel in the art world. This notion of, say, professional colleges or professional studying and artisanal or skilled work. You know, in the art world, there is something very similar. The upper caste art forms are divine. The upper caste art forms are not political because they don't deal with these very dirty things, do they? They are about these very, very difficult, very complex, very esoteric ideas of nada and all these mumbo jumbo words that we use. Whereas the art forms that we bracket as folk, as local, are not that. They are labor, they are physical, they are not sophisticated. They are the sources which are later sophisticated by the upper caste people. It's very similar to the way in education you place professional education, organized education, vis-a-vis artisanal work or a work of an electrician or a plumber or those caste groups. So we do something very similar in the way we divide the art world between that which is physical and that which is intellectual. This is also a casteist notion. Separating the body from the mind is a very important mechanism of actually perpetuating caste. The upper caste will never discuss the body. They'll always discuss things that are only about the mind, or what they presume is about the mind, if I correct myself. And what is related to the body is not considered to be an evolved way of thinking. Now, all this is prevalent in the way we have caste, which is why I were to answer Professor Thorat's point of why upper caste arts never deal with the politics or the voices of protest and questioning and the Dalit questions, is simply because status quo is comfortable for upper caste. Why would I ask a question when I'm very happy where I'm sitting? Which is why it is the marginal art forms that have always asked the difficult questions of society. Very rarely in the world of art have you seen art forms that are practiced by the elite castes or the elite races or colors around the globe ever ask very difficult, self-reflective, uncomfortable questions, because we would prefer everything to remain as it is.
Thank you so much for that. I'll directly jump on to my next question now, which is, what barriers to equity does caste present? For this, I would specifically request Professor Thorat and Ajantha Subramanian to respond.
Look, one has to understand that the caste ideology is based on the principle of inequality, a graded inequality, which grew privileges to the higher caste and denied the same normal human right to the lower caste. That was in the past, but even today. So in practice, as T.M. Krishna has rightly said, that in practice, the caste continue in the form of customs, so far as the caste give them the privileges. Now, how do I continue that privileges of mine? I can only continue my privileges, my greed, by denying it to the others. And I deny them in the ownership of property. I deny them in ownership of business. I deny them in ownership in employment. I deny them in admission in the colleges or higher education. I deny them in the Anganwadi and midday meal through discrimination. I do the same thing in higher education institution by not incorporating the issues of caste into the various curriculum. In except sociology and to some extent in political science, caste has not become a part of the courses of economics. For example, economics of discrimination in India, hardly there are only 2 departments where economics of discrimination is being taught. So the important point is that the caste, in order to maintain my privileges, I deny them to others through the process of discrimination in multiple spheres. This is one part. Second part is that I don't bring out this dirt in the various expressions. Art is one of them. Only I see Savi and a couple of others who describe caste. Possibly gender issue will come, but the caste is hardly to be seen. I have written a foreword to a book edited by Gary Torkata on Dalit art and imagery. And you can very easily see that how caste issue has been completely bypassed in art. It was bypassed in literature. It is the Dalit who have to take initiative and produce Dalit literature. It is the Dalit who have to start Dalit dramas. It is the Dalit who has to go ahead and develop a system of songs and music. high caste, exception apart, have not taken a lead. The reason is that this is my tradition which give me the privileges. I continue to enjoy those privileges, and I can enjoy those privileges at the cost of the lower caste by denying them. So the caste is directly impact and create inequality by denying educational, political, social and cultural rights, and also the expression of all kind. It may be art, it may be music, it may be cinema, it may be literature. So that is the impact of the caste. So caste continue to create inequality. Is repeat inequality continuously through the process of discrimination. Although the constitution and law talk about equality before law, talk about equality of opportunity, but in practice I don't do that. High caste don't do that, because if I do that, I lose my privileges. So caste discrimination became a continuous source of inequality between the high caste and the low caste. You take any indicators of human development, what you will find that there are inequality between the high caste and low caste, whichever indicator you take. So caste continue to be a source of economic, social, and political inequality, and cultural inequality, educational inequality.
So let me just echo some of what has been said already by Professor Thorat. Ambedkar referred to caste as a system of graded inequality, which is so difficult to break precisely because of this investment in protecting one's relative status, right? Over and above striving for equality. And I think it's this investment in relative status, right? Who am I above and who am I below, right? So trying to kind of negotiate one's position within this structural hierarchy, it's that which I think makes solidarity even between marginalized groups so difficult to achieve, right? So even in regions with strong non-Brahmin movements, right, like Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra, what you see is, you see the suppression of Dalits by OBCs. I mean, this continues to be a very powerful barrier against a unified anti-caste movement, because everybody is trying to protect their own relative status, right, vis-a-vis other groups. But I think, and this also kind of echoes what Professor Thorat said, I think it's really important to keep in mind that the power of caste is not just in its operation as a set of beliefs, right, about superiority and inferiority. And the problem with seeing caste as just belief is that then it becomes very easy for those of us who are the historical beneficiaries of caste to now say that we no longer believe in it, that we've somehow transcended it and become casteless, right? But the power of caste lies much more in its operation as a material structure through which different groups have inherited vastly different sets of resources, right? So whether or not I, as a beneficiary of caste, believe in it or not, I continue to benefit materially from my family history of literacy, schooling, employment, etc. And I don't just benefit materially. These histories of inequality become the basis for me to accumulate even more property, even more capital, even more qualifications, right? And in this way to sort of further exacerbate inequality. And it's this structure of, it's caste as a structure of unequal inheritances that something like reservations seeks to intervene in, right? So that those who have been historically disadvantaged are now afforded opportunities that they otherwise would not have had, right? With the result that public higher education, public employment now do, to a greater extent than they did before, now do reflect the larger society more closely, right? So, and of course, there are many people who think that reservations themselves are the source of inequality, right? And the only way to achieve true equality is through a system of meritocracy, right? In which people are evaluated purely as individuals with different abilities, right? But this is a fantasy. This is a liberal fantasy. This fantasy of the meritocratic individual is a fantasy that completely sidesteps the historical inheritances of caste, that actually allows some people to say do well in an entrance exam, or achieve educational success, right? So I think in this sense, the notion of meritocracy is actually a profound barrier to addressing the enduring inequalities of caste and to bringing about a more fundamental transformation, right? In the distribution of material resources, in social hierarchies of value, right? Which are necessary. I mean, these much more sort of fundamental transformations in aesthetics, right? In all of these things through which caste kind of pervades every aspect of Indian society, and that make it impossible for human well-being, for human flourishing, to be more widely available, right? Like at the moment, these things, even like basic human well-being, like this is concentrated within a shrinking minority in Indian society, right? And all of that has to do with these inheritances of caste that take material form, right? That are not just about beliefs, right? I wish it were just about beliefs. It's not, right? It's something much more intractable and material.
Thank you so much for that. I'll quickly go on to the next question, and I would request TM Krishna and Savi Sawarkar to answer this, but as briefly as possible, because we will be starting with participant questions at 7:20. So, what labor does caste invisibilize? And I would leave this open for either Mr. Krishna or Savi to take it up.
It's very, this my field is image. I deal with the aesthetics in the image. When I start, I was thinking about who is the Manu. Manu is not a one person. Manu is not a one human being. Manu is the psyche. Manu is the ideology. When I started to painting the Manu, I haven't seen any references in anywhere, but I have seen that references within the society. What is happening in the today's and the earlier atrocities, inequality, there is a various form of social exclusion. And that exclusion, I really entered in that with the issues of women in this country. Who's the responsible for that? The issues of Dalits, who's the responsible for that? The issues of minorities, who's the responsible for that? Is the Manu. When I start painting the Manu, it was very difficult for me. And slowly I tried to build the image of the Manu. There was one writer, lyrics were written by Dr. Tulsiram. His song was the Manu Maha Thagwa Ham Jani Re Kiske Saath Wo Ras Rasai. That was a small cassette, I got it. And I was listening that. I was listening, and getting inspiration from that song. And I'm looking to the society, into the society also. To look at the one psyche in the one form. It has a multiple angles. There is a one Manu, but there is a thousands of definition of the Manu. Every person has his own definition of the Manu. What the Muslim will be to define the Manu, it will different. What the Dalit will define the Manu, it's a different. So there is a multiple answers and the definition. So what the Dalit artist, what the Ambedkarite artist is going to paint the Manu, that I did some of the Manu, which is 1996. Some people, right-wing people came and they destroyed my painting of the Manu. And that was a really, that was a kind of reaction. The reaction to that reaction for the creative mind. What we have the creative mind. Their mind is the reactive mind, but our mind is the creative mind. And that creative mind can build a work of art. Thorat sir has written one of the book of that already he mentioned, Dalit and art and the visual imagery. That was a surprise. One economist, one educationist can write a preface on the book of fine art, book of uh, art and imagery. But that was really, that that is a small constitution for the modern Dalit artist. Every I'm requesting you that was really surprised. Then I asked the Gary also, who was the writer of the main editor of that book. He said, "Ki, Thorat sir, why you get?" He said, "Ki, I have experience with him. He traveled village to village from Pune, Aurangabad to the Nagpur. But they have seen the images. So this visual aesthetics has a lot of power. Just like a quantum physicist, they says is the observation is important. Now is the era of the quantum physics. The people are studying how is the universe work, how is the nature is work. The art is not confined with the painting now. Art is confined with the multiple expressions. The new artists, I am very hopeful that artists are coming. Now I am not, I don't claim I am the only the Dalit artist. Many people, they think I am the Dalit artist. But no, before me there is a Dalit artist, but nobody noticed them. Now this is the time to notice. This is the time to inclusion. So what I need to say, dear, to paint a Manu in this country is not a old subject. It is very contemporary. We have to identify who is the Manu of this country. That Manu working in the various places. So this, my series really is going on the Manus. So what finally I said is that's why Baba Sahib has written wonderful line, this one of the sentence in his Buddhist Dhamma. He said, Saundarya Priya Buddha, who loves to the beauty, that is a Buddha. Acquaintance with the beauty, if you want to attain in nirvana. So art has such kind of power, which understood. Baba Sahib has given the two great symbols to the independent India. One is the Ashok Chakra in national emblem, national flag, and there is a lion capital. That's a great contribution. Baba Sahib designed so many. Sapru House design is designed by the Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. We in the college designed by he has that kind of aesthetics, the aesthetics. So now this aesthetics is the power. Now it has a multi-dimensional phenomena. The aesthetics has a multi-dimensional. When you walk, there is aesthetics. When you sit, there is aesthetics. It is like a mindfulness. And that mindfulness can help to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Savi. Krishna, if you could take it up from there. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can, I'm just sorry about the light. I just lost electricity, so bear with me. The question was about, can you repeat the question for me, please?
The question was regarding what kind of labor is invisibilized by caste.
Okay, it's a large question, but I'm going to try and just maybe speak about one specific part. And this I would like to connect with my latest book, which is called Sebastian and Sons, about the people who make the instrument, the mridangam. And the mridangam is played mostly by Brahmins, but the makers of the mridangam are mostly Dalits. So I think why I want to speak one aspect of the invisibilization, and what is closely connected to it is the notion of purity. And the building of this idea of the pure and the impure in the casteist framework is a mechanism through which physical work, physical art is invisibilized. Now, to take an example of the mridangam maker, the mridangam is made of 3 skins: cow, buffalo, and goat. Okay, and unlike what all Brahmins keep saying, that it's a dead cow that is chosen or a dead buffalo, no, it is not a naturally dead animal. This animal is killed, the meat is used for the industry, and this killed animal skin is used for this instrument, specifically chosen so that it has certain qualities. that it can produce the sound that is required by the Brahmin player. This entire part is invisibilized. Going to the abattoir, the blood, the gore, the intellect required to choose the skin, to understand the nature of the animal, to bind it together in a complex manner, to be the first person who ever produces sound on that instrument. It is not the Brahmin player, it's the Dalit maker. The first sound produced on that instrument is by the Dalit maker. It's he who decides if it is fit. The whole binding process, this entire process of artistry, of making this absolutely sophisticated, exquisite instrument, that is what it is today only because of the last 100 years of work of these people. Otherwise, it wouldn't be what it is. This entire process is invisibilized. And it's invisibilized because of this notion of purity and the separation from the physical. And I'm going to quickly tell you something that a Mridangam maker told me. The Mridangam maker told me that, you know, I have to be there in between the skin and the Mridangam. Because if I'm not there, the Mridangam will never be made. I am the catalyst. I'm also the screen who makes sure that the Mridangam player does not have to see what is behind. So whatever is behind the screen is completely hidden. So the notion of purity and impurity is one of the mechanisms through which certain art forms, certain artists, their work, their intellect, their entire being is invisibilized. And this is not just an abstract thing, because this leads to economic hardship, social marginalization, lack of education, being told that this is the only profession you should continue. When a Mridangam maker goes, asks a Mridangam player, can you pay for the education of my son? The player will tell him, why do you want him to go to college? Just send him, let him continue this profession. I'll make sure I pay him well. All this is because of the need to keep that separation between the Mridangam maker, between the making and the sound that we call is produced by, ironically, by Nandi.
All right, thank you so much. We'll head on to the next question now. And the question is primarily for, again, actually, I'll leave the floor open for this question to be answered by any of the panelists, but try to keep your comments as brief as possible because we'll be taking questions from the audience and we have quite a few from there. So the question is that how, or even if that is possible, how can one unlearn casteism in these ecosystems, specifically arts and education? I think Professor Thorat, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult question, but the problem before us is that in the Indian Constitution we have equality as a basis of our behavior, our governance, equality before law, equal opportunity, and yet in a society we have a lot of inequalities, we have discrimination in social, economic, and religious sphere. I need not go into get a detail. On an average, you have 13 to 14,000 cases of atrocity registered every year by Dalit. And the primary data will bring out discrimination in many spheres. I had, along with other colleagues, we had a study of rural untouchability as such. So the point is that in theory, we have a concept of equality. In practice, inequality. What's the reason? Why inequality still continues? The reason is that, in view of Dr. Ambedkar, is that the people continue to believe, as T.M. Krishna has rightly said, people continue to believe in the notion of inequality because the reason is that inequality, caste inequality, is a part of the religion. That's the major difference. You know, you had a slavery in USA and slavery disappeared. The moment you had a law against slavery, slavery in different form continues in racial discrimination, but not its formal form. Here in India, we had a law against untouchability in 1955. Untouchability still continued. The reason is it has roots in religious philosophy. So therefore, people follow it, untouchability or caste discrimination as a religion, and religion is based on faith and difficult to be changed because logic and rationality doesn't work there.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, despite of that fact, what we require is that it is the high caste who are the victim of the religious notion of inequality. They should take a lead. They should build up a movement against the caste system. Untouchables are doing on their own. Anti-caste movement and social movement and movement to Dalit art and music, it has been pointed out by Savi and Krishna. They do on their own. But it is the high caste who practice caste discrimination. They have to change their old ideas and they have to practice it. What is important is the change of practice. And we do not see any movement among the high caste as far as the caste is concerned. In the field of education, where is the education against the caste system? There are no courses. There are hardly courses here and there, moral education and all that. In USA now they have started the courses. I think the Subramanian probably will tell you that they have started citizenship education, where they sensitize the student about racism, sexism, poverty. We do not have that courses. So we have to reform our education system in a manner such that we build up the citizen through students who believe in equality, who develop a feeling against caste system or gender discrimination. So education we have to change. Quite a lot. But I think that change of ideas will take a lot of time. Till that time, what we do, because untouchable continue to suffer with a high poverty, high malnutrition, low education, enrollment rate, dropout rate, and discrimination in higher education institutions. So you have to have a policy of affirmative action, whereby you give them share in the ownership of means of production, you give them share in the parliament, we already give you share in the education and share in public jobs, but this is all confined to public sector, which constitute a very small proportion of our economy. 80% of the jobs are in private sector. The entire private sector is out of the purview of reservation policy. So we have to develop a policy of reservation, of giving a fair share to the scheduled caste in every sphere of our life. Nationalism, according to Dr. Ambedkar, has to be socially inclusive. And if you exclude some minorities from the mainstream of the nation, then there are issues. So I think you require solution on both. The high caste should take a lead to change of the idea, to change the practice. And secondly, there has to be economic and educational policy for the private sector, for the scheduled caste, so that they get fair share. So simultaneously, two things happens.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Thorat. Ajantha and Krishna, if you would want to take this forward now and give your comments in brief. And in the end, we'll again come back to Savi if we have time.
Yeah, I'll just say one or two things. This is something that's been brought up by all of us. I think that one of the first things that has to happen to unlearn casteism is to recognize that caste is pervasive, right? And that it's precisely through the appearance of castelessness that caste works most insidiously, right? So anytime we assume the non-existence of caste, either in kind of institutional spaces, in the arts, etc., we have to pause and think about how this assumption, right, actually invisibilizes and reinforces the operations of caste, right? So the first starting assumption should be that caste is pervasive, right? That there are no caste-free spaces, right? And then to figure out how one is the beneficiary, right, of these kind of systems of historical advantage and disadvantage, right? And I think, part of that is for upper castes to let go of this assumption that they deserve what they have, right? That somehow everything that they have, has come to them by virtue of their own merit, right? This idea of merit is such a dangerous idea, because it prevents us from seeing that that success, as much as its absence, is the result of historical structures, right? That it's not because we are uniquely talented individuals that, you know, we occupy positions of power in the corporate sector or in higher education. No, it's because we have been advantaged. We've been advantaged by caste. We've been advantaged by the state. We've been advantaged in all kinds of economic and social ways to get where we have gotten, right? So it's to let go of this idea of merit altogether and sort of recognize ourselves as beneficiaries. And then I think the last thing is to recognize that to be part of an anti-caste politics, those of us who are beneficiaries of caste privilege have to recognize ourselves as beneficiaries and commit to a politics of far-reaching redistributive justice, that it isn't enough to be patrons of, say, the Dalit arts. It isn't enough to be private sector philanthropists, right? Because these kinds of actions actually rest on structural privilege, right? Yeah. To be a patron is not to give up structural privilege. It's actually to use it, right? To be a private sector philanthropist is not to give up, it's to use it, right? So we have to recognize that these things that we think are forms of sort of well-meaning do-gooding, right, actually perpetuate, right, the very structures of privilege that we're trying to sort of unsettle. So, so I think it requires much more than leveraging our privilege. We need to give up our privilege. Yeah. And the first step to doing that is to recognize that we have it, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ajantha. The point is that it's almost 7:30 and we have approximately 45 questions in the question box. So I think it might be nice if we could start addressing them. So in the end, we might come back to, or most of the questions, what you want to say might get covered in the questions that have been asked. So I will come down to the first question that we'll be asking. It's by Sairam Sadanandan, and they ask, for many in elite privileged castes, college reservation is the first perspective of being on the side of losing opportunity, losing an admission. Most fall for the obvious victim mindset. Is it possible to have conversations on reservation even at school level? Would it help?
No, I think, listen, at the school level, we have Right to Education Act, and Right to Education Act is based on the provision in the Constitution that the education in the age group of 7 to 14 is compulsory and free. So at the school level, this is for everybody, and so there is no need that way for the reservation, as it is compulsory and free. But now in the privatization of the school education, there are limitations on the scheduled caste and poor to get an admission. Now they have introduced 20% quota. But I think, as far as my understanding goes, I think at the primary level, it should be free and compulsory and for everybody, as a matter of fact.
Can I just jump in here?
Yes.
So the two things. One is, we do not, even the most liberal schools are liberal private schools, alternative schools, whatever they call themselves, will never discuss caste in school. That's one they will discuss patriarchy, they will discuss everything else, but caste will never be discussed even in high school, even for an 11th grader. They will never make that as a subject of conversation, let alone, textual subject. So I definitely think, the idea of equity, for example, we kept talking about equality. I think we should talk about equity. Reservations, affirmative action is a form of addressing equity, but equity as an idea doesn't exist in our psyche, in education, in students. And I want to say here that our entire schooling system of private and public is a casteist framework. Unless we talk about that publicly, nothing is going to change. Who are the children who go to public schools? Will I send my daughters to a public school? No, I will not. I will send her to a private school. She studies there for 12 years. Who are her classmates? Similar people from similar bandwidth of caste. So does she really have a reality check on what caste is? Absolutely no. I can talk about it in the house how much ever I want, 100 times. But she has never had a meal with a person of a different culture, a person who has been marginalized, a person who has never had the idea of education for generations in their life, people who have feared people like her, does she know how to even begin a conversation? She does not know. Actually, we are creating generations of casteist people, generations of fear. And then suddenly at college level, when people are adults, we expect them to understand caste. It's ridiculous, actually pretty stupid, to be blunt. How can you expect citizens to recognize caste within, recognize caste as a system, if it's not conversation and if there is no social framework starting from school that allows them to experience that in conversation and learn and unlearn? Because at 40, the only thing like you suggested, they can talk about is reservations and losing one seat in some college. That's the only idea they have. So I think it is essential that I think private education has to be challenged, seriously challenged. And I think conversations have to begin at high school levels, without doubt.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Krishna. Could we move on to the next question, or would you want to respond?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I will just only add what Krishna has said very rightly, that instead of creating a common school, we are creating a caste system and hierarchy into the school education. We have a government schools, we have a slightly better government school, central school, then we have a Sainik school, then we have a school for military people. The whole hierarchy of the school system has been created, but the quality of education varies. And then there is no interaction between the poor, low caste and the high caste. That is the major problem of school education today, by allowing the private player in the offering of the school education.
Thank you so much.
Can I actually say one little thing to this? This sense of victimhood on the part of upper caste. I think that sense of victimhood comes out of the assumption that they aren't beneficiaries to start with, right? Yeah. So it seems like what reservations is doing is unfairly advantaging one group of people and disadvantaging another group, right? And to think that, you have to believe that there's a level playing field to start with, right? There is no level playing field, right? And so I think one of the things that really has to happen is that when we talk about reservations, we have to talk about both sides of the story, right? When we talk about reservations, we typically only talk about disadvantage, right? We only talk about how caste operates within the reserved category as a form of disadvantage. We don't talk about how caste operates within the general category as a form of privilege.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be a recognition that caste is operative on both sides. And it's because that has been invisibilized, right? The operations of caste within the general category has been invisible. It's because of that upper caste can think of themselves as victims. They're like, oh my God, I've been denied this, right? That it's not a corrective to existing privileges, right? They are unable to see that because we don't have the conversation about caste privilege as much as we need to. I think we do have the conversation about caste disadvantage. We don't have a parallel conversation about privilege. That is incredibly important. And that has to happen as early as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll actually, the next question is that how have anti-caste activists been able to question the cultural hegemony of the Brahminical foundations of art? I'm going to direct this question to Savi Sawarkar, and then from there, have other people respond.
Look at the Brahmin people, the privileged people, they haven't produced their morality. They haven't produced their really art critic and the critic. That is lacking. And when you look into all the kind of atrocities in the field of, there is a cultural atrocities also is there. One artist come up with his subjects and he works on the atrocities, he works on the marginalization, he works on the gender issue. He has to face a lot of problems. He get marginalized from the mainstream of art. Not all the people, but they are the most of people. their life. We do not have that kind of art critics also. Very few art critics, they are working on such kind of issues. There is a historian also. There is a few historians that slowly they are starting to work on this. And this caste should be the part and the parcel of curriculum. When we talked about the self-expression, why not do that expression through the caste? And the caste should teach in the fine art college, all the institute, all the educational institute, where the people can understand. And tomorrow, India can produce a kind of Benita chorus or the volunteer. We need a good volunteer in this country. Until or unless we don't have the volunteer, who will be the challenge? The volunteer is not in the field of the one field. There is a multiple fields out there. There is a music. There is a theater. There is a film. You see, there is a lot of discrimination in the field also, in the film. So what kind of education we are giving? Our education, till today, we have the root of their sacred religious text. Still, they are falling to the Manusmriti. Manusmriti is their main text. They said, we don't need a constitution, we need a Manusmriti. Such kind of things is coming up. This should be the challenge. Challenge by not from the lower strata of the society, but the challenge from the higher class of the society, higher class of the society. So these challenges come from all the sides in the very positive manner. I paint one of the subject, that's my first painting in my life, untouchable carrying a dead cow with latte. This was my first oil painting in my life. Till today, that painting is with me. That painting opened the debates and gave me a lot of source material to look at the things. Because I know that what is the significance of the cow eating in the domain of untouchability, in the domain of discrimination. Cow is a big issue. So what is my humble request to the educated, to the education the policy maker? They should bring such a open education, the education from the life, the education from their personal experiences. Of course, there is a multiple way to have the education, but that education to come when they are going to produce their own volunteer from their community.
Thank you so much, Savi. The next question is primarily for Ajantha, and this has been asked by Jayant. They ask, engineering today is privileged as a profession over artisanship and trades worldwide, though probably not to the same extent as in India. How does this square with her described history of the caste-based exaltation of engineering in the 19th century India? Can this privileging of engineering not be explained simply as arising from its higher earning potential?
Look, I mean, to understand the establishment of any profession or any academic discipline, one has to situate it in its context, right? So you can't understand either a profession or a discipline without attending to a history of social inequality. And this is the case in India, and it's the case anywhere else, right? So in the US, for instance, race has been key to the structuring of engineering education, right? And there are scholars who've written about this, about how very similarly, you had this sort of distinction between professional and technical schools, right? So there were certain social groups which were tracked into, professional learning, and others into industrial labor, right, through technical schools, and that distinction was a racial one. So one can see similar dynamics in different places, which may not have to do with caste, but have to do with other systems of social stratification, right? I mean, this question about whether the status of engineering has to do with who populates the profession, or whether it is the economics of it. I mean, these are not separable, right? Like, there are certain forms of knowledge which accrue economic value, right, for particular reasons. So why does engineering have a higher earning potential, right, than carpentry, right? That in India is a caste question, right? There's a reason why certain forms of knowledge have higher market value. And it has to do with histories of caste, histories of stratification, right? Who's able to profit, literally, right, from certain forms of knowledge and who is not. I mean, Krishna talked about one of these Mridangam makers asking his high caste patron, right, for help in sending his son to school. And this was sort of seen as an absurd request, right? And that idea that there are certain opportunities available only to those who have certain kinds of knowledge or skill, right, is part of why, you know, some people have higher earning potential than others, right? Why should a Mridangam worker not be able to make ends meet and send his son to a university? It's because their practice is devalued, both in society and in the marketplace. These things are intimately linked, right?
May I come here, Sai, if
Yes,
one
please
point?
do.
Yeah. See, one has to, one has to go into the one important point. All those vocations, music, dancing, artisans, all kind of occupation like carpentry or blacksmith, uh, and other related to leather, dancing and music were all considered inferior occupation to be done by the untouchable and by others. They were condemned. Now what do you see? Entire classical music, entire dancing, classical dancing, film industry, and all those artisans, when they professionalized, became into uh, engineering, as well as the untouchable lady would help in delivery. Now, the moment the nursing job has been professionalized, all high caste have jumped.
Yeah.
The concept of inferior, those job being inferior is gone. It's all material thing. It's all greed. Please understand. There is a high economic return now on all this occupation because they have become professional, and untouchable untouchable and the lower caste are in the background. They are not into this when they were professionalized. Otherwise, tell me, all classical music world, where is this singing was considered to be the inferior occupation? Who has gone into it? Who has gone into medicals? Who has gone into nursing? Who has gone into, for example, leather boot making was a job of a chamar considered to be inferior. The professionalization of the leather goods and shoes and other thing. Who is there now? Who is in leather the technology? This all has been taken over by the high caste because of the access to education. So I think it's all economics. Wherever I get a grain. Now, for example, agriculture, business was not the occupation of the high caste. All of them they have entered into business. So there is a sociology behind it, but there is a whole lot of economics behind it.
Yeah, so there are hierarchies of value that are attached to certain hierarchies of labor. But it's also the case that certain forms of labor can be appropriated, right, by upper caste, sanitized, and made more valuable.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a form
Thanks.
of extraction, right?
So true.
That becomes the basis for capital accumulation on the part of upper caste.
Yeah.
Right?
Borrowing from that, actually, I would like to come down to Krishna with a question that has been asked by Arshmin Baveja. And they ask, it is also perceived in art and literature world that it is not for the unoppressed groups to talk about the pain and suffering of the oppressed. How do you see this, considering there is no one way of talking about oppression?
Okay, first I'll acknowledge that everybody's participation in this caste conversation is essential if there has to be any kind of movement in society. At the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge the complexity of a person of high caste discussing ideas of oppression or marginalization, because that is something which is never going to be my lived experience. I can say I don't believe in caste, but I'll benefit from caste all my life. Just like a man can be a feminist, he's still a man. That's never going to change. So how does, I think it's an important question, and a question that should never be forgotten, that is always in your mind when you're grappling with the issue, not just a systemic issue, but also your own way of expressing as an artist to the conversation or adding to the conversation. So how I see myself is, when does one express? When does one step back? When does one listen? There are no absolute answers to this side. I can tell you I have made mistakes, and I'm going to make more mistakes. I'm sure I'm going to make more mistakes. But to be ready to make that mistake, to unlearn at every point of time, is, I think, an essential necessity for the upper caste of this country. So like Ajantha also pointed out, the acknowledgement that our entire edifice is based on a discriminative basis, that ideas of knowledge, ideas of merit, ideas of ability, everything comes from a fundamental unequal society. And, you know, I find it very fascinating sometimes when upper caste women will be ready to talk about feminism, will ready to talk and will understand every nuance about how women are discriminated against, or you know, but the moment you turn the same analogy and say, let's just put the word caste over there, and suddenly everything disappears. The nuance goes away, the feelings go away. So this lack of, I think the starting point is an acknowledgement. And I think there is both a personal and a societal to it. And I want to say here, it is not an apologetic acknowledgement. This is very important, that upper caste should not think that they are apologizing for the past. No, you're acknowledging your own participation in the present. There's a huge difference in the discourse, because many times the upper caste think they have to say sorry for something. No, you have to acknowledge that you are part of the system and it's happening today. So how does one grapple with that? How does one engage with that? How does one engage that even, for example, if I speak about caste, more people listen. Why should they? Only because I'm upper caste. That's a complex catch-22, right? So I think this is I don't have a correct answer for this. I don't have a solution for this. But all I can say is stay alive to the complexity and the difficulty of the situation. That's what you should be doing.
Thank you so much. We might have to end the session here, but it was really great hearing from all four of you, and the way in which various notions of caste in specifically education, and also how technical education, etc., came about. At the same time, also looking at art and expression and how that is governed, the aesthetic a number of times, how it is governed by our notions of caste and the structure of caste. Thank you so much to all the panelists for having participated. We will sadly not be able to take any more questions because of a lack of time. However, we would like to thank specifically Preeti and Nikita, who have been with us for sign language translations and to make it more accessible, make the panel more accessible. Thank you so much to everyone for having participated. It was really a great learning session, and I hope everybody who tuned in is taking something back with them.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for organizing this.
Thank you very much.
To the long.
Thanks a lot, dear.